All right, it's 8 o'clock. My name is Melanie Grenz. I'm the project manager with the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It is our great honor to welcome Dr. Ann Glang, our previous director of CBIRT, to us this morning. Ann Glang is a special ed researcher with expertise in design, evaluation, implementation, and dissemination of educational interventions for children and youth with brain injuries. Recently, her work has centered on developing and evaluating educational modules delivered via video and animation for educators and parents. She will share some of the important lessons she has learned in the past 30 years. So welcome, Ann. Before I begin, this webinar will go from now until 8:45. We will stop at 8:35 for questions. Please save your questions for the Q&A at the end. Without further ado, welcome Dr. Ann Glang and Dr. Melissa McCart.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Melissa McCart. I am the person who has taken over director for Ann, and we'll say that Ann has been a mentor for me for many, many years. And so I am thrilled to interview her today. I'm going to start with a quick question for Ann and kind of introducing Ann. Obviously, Ann has a lot of experience, but I want to ask you, Ann, what was the path that led you to CBIRT, to developing CBIRT? How did you get there?
Okay, I'm going to answer that. But first, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining me. I feel a little bit ridiculous having this whole thing focus on me. So I appreciate all your interest and really appreciate your interest in the field. I think that's what's the most exciting for me about this, is that there's so many folks who want to learn more, and we at CBIRT are thrilled about that and want to connect, and really, really pleased to have you all here. And I just also want to just say, Melissa said this, the photos that were on the screen were really the photos of people who are responsible for CBIRT's success. So I like to think I've always had a lot of really good ideas, but it's because of the people you saw on the screen that we've been so successful. And three of them are joining us right now: Melanie, Matt, and Melissa. Especially Melissa, thank you so much for the 3,000th time for taking over and doing such a fabulous job.
You're very welcome.
Okay. This question probably has the longest answer of all of them, because I think it's kind of interesting, especially for people who maybe are new in their careers. My path to brain injury rehab was a direct line from being a French major at UC Berkeley to TBI rehab. So basically, very much not a straight line. Moved to Eugene. One of my first friends in Eugene was getting his master's in special education at U of O. And I said, that sounds really interesting. So I started taking classes, took classes about direct instruction, the research on long-term outcomes for kids who were taught with explicit instruction who have learning challenges. And those kids who were taught, especially K-3, how well they were doing as high school students. Took classes from people like Doug Carnine and Engelmann, Rob Horner. This was all in the early 80s. And I think what really struck me was this foundational belief that all kids can learn, and that how the way instruction is designed and sequenced, the examples you use, the clarity of your communication, your attention to mastery and review as a teacher, these are all critical and make a huge difference in the lives of kids. At the same time, I was working as a psychometrist. That's someone who does testing for the field for a neuropsychologist, and the neuropsychologist happened to be my now husband of 40 years. Anyway, long story there. I could talk a lot about what that was like, because he comes from a background in kind of assessment, and I came from a background in teaching now as my master's was progressing. And I kind of had an aha moment when I was testing folks for him. These were adults, and I thought, I could be teaching these people things instead of testing them and getting them frustrated, which is what was happening. And that kind of got me interested in, maybe I should focus on brain injury in my master's. And so I did. Kind of got interested in the literature. And those of you who are old enough to remember know that in the 80s, the literature was very much focused on adults. The field in general, the field believed that kids got better on their own. They went to school, they got better. We all know that's not true now. The other thing about the literature at that time was it was very much coming from a medical viewpoint. Let's try to fix this underlying skill, as opposed to let's work on skills that can support this child or this adult's life. And I have this great example, Melissa, I don't want to take too much time, but I have this great example of how things have changed. So I went to a workshop about 1985 on cognitive rehabilitation with folks with brain injury. And the presentation was about a research study in which the task that was being presented to the participants was crossing out the letter A on a piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, cross out the letter A, and the focus was on attention. Could the person focus on this, and this with the belief that this underlying foundational skill of attention was really important to rehabilitate so that they could get to other skills in their life. And someone, not me, in the audience, after they presented their data, and they did show that the person got better over time at crossing out A's, someone in the audience said, have you looked at how this transfers to functional skills? And the presenter said, no, but that's a really good idea. And coming from my special ed background, I was like, well, we work on functional skills. And actually in the 1960s, we did this approach, 50s and 60s, this approach of working on underlying skills. And it didn't seem to transfer. And those of you who know the literature and look at this know that we still don't have that evidence strongly that we see functional transfer when you work at a task that's not a functional one, that's not related to real world. And that really made me think, I think there's something that special ed has to bring to the field of rehab. And a great example of the antithesis of what I saw in 1985 is what Rick Limoncello and his team at Cerebellum's bakery in Portland are doing, where they are teaching bakers who have significant brain injuries to learn to make desserts, amazing desserts, and to run a small business. So these tasks that they're learning are helping them learn skills that bring them out in the community, are transferable to other places, etc. So I had kind of a bee in my bonnet about that time, about that issue. At the same time, I was working at the Oregon Rehab Center, which is an adult rehab facility, and I was able to apply a lot of things I was learning in the special ed program with the OTs, PTs, and SLPs that I got to work with. And we worked together to kind of switch things up a bit when we were working with patients in the rehab unit, where we would use a little more, use agreed upon goals, things that seem really like everybody should be doing this and probably are in rehab settings now. The agreed upon goals, break down the tasks, use consistent language, review and practice, things that help people be successful in learning. So all of this was super foundational, and it was like this path, I guess I go this way, a path that was like not linear whatsoever. And that's when after I finished the master's, I said, I think I want to do a PhD, and a little stipend from Dr. Carnine helped entice me a little more. And so I did focus my doctoral program on TBI and working with local teachers, working with folks in rehab. I continued doing that and got to do my dissertation with folks with TBI using SMART instructional principles. Then started working at Oregon Research Institute in Eugene with George Singer, and he and I wrote our first proposal in TBI, and that's kind of got me from French major to somebody who wanted to do research in TBI about 7, 8, whatever years later, however many years, I don't know how many years, quite a few years. So long answer, but I think it's important for all of us to realize that life doesn't have to be linear, and certainly career growth doesn't have to be. Oh, I can't hear you. Yeah.
You mentioned Rick Limoncello. He's in fact on today. Good morning, Rick.
Hi, Rick. Hi, Rick.
One of the, and if you haven't checked out Cerebellums and you're in Oregon, you really need to go check out Cerebellums. It's amazing. But Ann, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question, because I think we have some people on who are probably not familiar with the foundation of education and the work that Doug and Zig and Carnine are doing. So I just thought maybe you could tell folks a little bit about who those names are that you mentioned that were so important.
I could give a long lecture on this, but I'll summarize. Zig Engelmann, Doug Carnine are probably the most responsible for this direct instruction, for the development of direct instruction, and for the Zig for the development of it, Doug Carnine for the evaluation and years of research studies around direct instruction. And it's the idea that, and there's a lot of curriculum, and those of you who work out in schools are familiar with this, but lots of curriculum that uses those foundational instructional design principles of smart, all the things I said, smart example selection, sequence tasks so they build on one another. Don't teach fractions in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, ninth grade because kids never get it. Do it right once and then keep building. So it's those ideas. And Carnine was responsible for actually the largest educational study. He and Zig and many others, the largest educational study in America's history called Follow Through. We had Head Start in the 1960s, and so this was Follow Through, and they looked at, I think, 10 different instructional approaches across at sites across America in some mostly, maybe exclusively low-income areas, under-resourced communities, and showed that direct instruction compared to the other 9 approaches pretty much beat every other approach on every dimension, not just academic, but things like social, emotional, self-esteem. And then I think what really got me when I was a young master's student was these kids who got this in K-3, who got language instruction, reading instruction, math instruction, strong instructions in K-3, went on to graduate from high school at much greater rates. They went to college at greater rates. So that early strong academic infrastructure really made a huge difference. So with bringing it up to today, with the focus now on the science of reading, this is all people like Carnine, who's not a young man, are now saying, I want to get back involved because it's a really exciting time. Because now we're realizing kids are failing in reading, especially, and that is not okay. We know how to teach reading and have for many years. So that I think the kernel here that was really important for me was I saw that you could do something pretty simple like smart instruction and make a huge difference in a kid's life.
And you'll see if you go through any of the CBIRT instructional products for adults, say for teachers, that everything CBIRT does is based on all of what Ann said. And so when we design content, we always go back to those foundations of how do people learn? We know how people learn, and we can apply that to adults. And so that, I will say, from my perspective, has carried forward from Ann's early years into current CBIRT work. So I think that has been impactful to Ann, but then impactful to everybody around you, because you brought that to CBIRT. And if our staff didn't know it, they all do now. And so everything we do is based on that.
Well, and I think just it's worth mentioning that Lori Powell's work, and Rick Lemoncello, who's on here, and if you haven't heard him do a presentation, you should, because he does an amazing job with explaining instruction, especially in the context of brain injury rehab. But Lori Powell has done some really nice work in this domain too, looking at those instructional principles for adults. So yeah, and if people are interested, we can certainly find some articles, historical articles, and other current things to put up and to send out.
Right. So I think we had a question we were going to ask you, the history of CBIRT, but I think you kind of hit on that and how it was how CBIRT started. But I think if you could do just a quick, you and Bonnie kicking it off kind of talk.
Sure. Bonnie Totus and she and I worked together for 30 years. and finish each other's sentences. And so I miss her still. Melissa's great. And we are starting to finish each other's sentences after year 10 or something. But Bonnie's a qualitative researcher, and I had more background in single subject and quantitative designs. Bonnie and I met at Oregon Research Institute, and she did a presentation on her qualitative approach with families of children with physical disabilities. And her main point was, when you don't know much about a field, it's really important to go to the people who are experiencing it and to find out from them what's going on before you start designing interventions to improve things. And I looked at her and I went up afterwards. I said, we have got to work together, because this is exactly where the field of rehab, TBI rehab is. And we need to bring this voice and this methodology to the field. So that's when we started getting involved, and we've had lots of success. And just that I would say that probably the most, and this, maybe there's a question about this later, but the most important paper I think that we did together was following young adults who had injuries as children, and following them to find out how they were doing. And the paper was called Redefining Success. Again, that's something we can certainly share. But what it found was, in this sample of 90 young adults in Oregon and Washington, many kids who could have received services through special education did not, or they got not very good services, and they had really poor transition outcomes. And that was like 2011 paper. Field is ripe for an update on that one. So anybody who's interested in doing that kind of work, I think it's really, really important, and to find out, what isn't happening for these kids that should be.
Yeah. Next question. So I think you have people see you and see all the energy you've brought to this field and all the years that you've put into it. And, I think folks might be wondering, what the heck has motivated you to stay this involved and with the level of energy for the amount of time you've been doing this work?
So there's probably lots of answers to that. I can kind of talk about the work, I think, but I do think a huge part of it is the team of people that Bonnie and I, and now you and I, Melissa, have around us. There's every single person I think we've ever worked with has had this same kind of passion and non-ego approach to this work. Like, we can really make a difference, and this is really important work. So, like I was mentioning, that's the qualitative study that Bonnie led in the 1990s, where we saw that kids weren't getting services, and we knew that there were some solutions to that, and that motivated me. In the 2000s, going to presentations and seeing 0 or 1 participant in my session, and this happened at both state and national conferences, I thought, okay, no one is paying attention to these kids, and this is not good. So that motivated me. So I think Bonnie and I said, what are we doing wrong? We need to pivot or do something different, because we're not getting folks. And then what happened over about a 10-year period, and it coincides with the concussion legislation all over the country, was in about 2015 or so, I went to Iowa and did some presentations. I had physicians in my audience at many of the talks, and I did like 5 of them, physicians, and they would come up to me afterwards, and they were familiar with our work, and they were engaged and interested. And I thought, okay, something is shifting, that people are realizing that kids get served in medical centers for a very short time, and then they're back in school, and so we need to be paying more attention to school. Then I think since the 2020s, late 2010s, I think your work, Melissa, is what's motivating me, that you're working with state agencies, you're working with foundations, you're working with new populations of folks with brain injury, and bringing in some great new staff to CBIRT. That's motivating. The success, it's like, I feel like the seeds that Bonnie and I planted in 1989 are actually bearing fruit. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, even just since I've started, I've been with CBIRT, gosh, 13 years now. And when I first started presenting, even 13 years ago, there'd be 5 people. Now, we had 120 register for this webinar from all different walks of life, all different fields. It's so exciting to have the community kind of coming together and realizing that if we work together, we can get some stuff done. It's really fun. It's really fun.
100% agree.
So on top of that, you have a daughter with special needs, and I think where people are curious, like how has that informed what we do and what you do, and just the perspective on education.
Yeah. So my daughter Grace was born with cerebral palsy long after I started this work. And I think as it's affected my work and my parenting. So in terms of the work affected the parenting, because I knew about special ed. I'd been out in a lot of schools. I'd worked with lots of teachers, I'd worked with lots of kids. And I knew just how important being a strong advocate was. And I knew a little bit about how to do that well, as opposed to how not to. And, yeah, that's, again, that could be a whole conversation in and of itself. But I did a lot of going into my daughter's classroom and volunteering, bringing coffee. I did that in all of first and second grade because, teachers, it's the hardest job in the world, absolute hardest job in the world. So I think I had and still have an understanding of the constraints under which folks in schools work, and some empathy for that. And so, and that fact that, there's 35 other small children that they have to worry about, not just mine. So it helped me kind of navigate that. And I got to say, she got a great education. The special ed services around her were perfect and excellent. And I think it was because we worked well together, her teams and I. In terms of the research, I think that the work with Grace's teachers and school folks helped me realize that not every parent was a great advocate, and if they could get to be a better advocate, that would help them and their kid and the school. And so we did some research studies in that domain, and I think had some nice outcome there. And then I think also, and I'll mention Deanne Anru, who's working with us now, Melissa, you and I, all of the folks who work at all the PIs, the principal investigators who work at CBIRT, have this foundational belief that you really need to work with the stakeholders to design research studies. So working with parents to design what kinds of interventions do we need to come up with. A great example of that is Megan Coons, who's a new investigator with us, and Doug Gomez. Both of them bring that stakeholder perspective to their work.
Yeah, and I think just remembering meeting Grace for the first time, her advocacy for people with special needs is inspiring. And she will tell you, person first, don't talk about my wheelchair, don't talk about my stuff, talk about me. And I think we keep that very center as we develop programs and talk to people. So yeah, she's pretty inspiring. Let's see. Look, she's gonna make me cry. The next question is, what is some information you learned along the way that you can't imagine not knowing? And I think you probably already answered some of that, but is there anything besides instructional design that you can't imagine not knowing?
Yeah, I have a couple of kernels of wisdom that I learned from folks with brain injuries. The first one was from a man with a brain injury. I'm with him at a conference. We're waiting for a taxi. The taxi's not coming. We're waiting and waiting and waiting. And the other people are getting quite stressed out because we're late for something. And he looks at all of us and says, "You guys, don't you know the most important life lesson? Do not stress over things you can't control." So a lot of people already knew that. I did not know that at the time. And I really thank him every day for that. And then the other was, I think this was a physician who was injured in a bike crash, and she was given a keynote at a conference, and she said, "We are all temporarily able-bodied. So, just know that this experience could happen to you tomorrow. And I think that made it really real for me and is something that's just kind of important to remember. Yeah, nothing more than that.
Okay, so changing gears, CBIRT has had ups and downs and successes and failures over the years. But I think we are very positive focused. So I am curious, what is a story of success that really holds a special place in your heart that you won't forget?
I think the most important one, a lot of great things have happened, but this thing that happened at a conference in Vancouver, Canada, was a CEC, Council for Exceptional Children conference in the early 2000s. And I think Bonnie and I were standing up talking about the team model, which you oversee, that has been operational in Oregon since the early 90s. And for those of you who don't know, this is, Melissa now, and Melanie also oversees a lot of this work now. But we started this notion that you could train interdisciplinary teams of folks out in schools in brain injury so that they could consult and support their colleagues who are getting kids with TBI in their class. So I'm giving this talk, and it's almost over, and this woman raises her hand, and she stands up and gives this testimonial. She goes, "Look, you guys, I used to live in Oregon, and now I live in I don't know what state. I don't even remember what state it was." And she said, "And I just want to tell you that if you have a child with a brain injury, make sure you live in Oregon, because those people know how to take care of kids, and they don't know how to communicate with parents." And I was just kind of floored. Like, this was not something I prompted at all, but she found that in this new state she lived in, it was not happening. And she was really struggling to get services and to find supports for her child. So I remember thinking, well, this is Sue Hayes and her team over in Bend, Oregon. And Sue Hayes still doing this work. I don't know if she's on today, but I mean, it's great what they've put in place there. And we had a small part in that at the beginning, and then it's just taken off, and it's really all over the state. And I don't know, Melissa, maybe you want to say a little bit more, that maybe you've already done that webinar. I don't know.
We've talked about teams, but yeah, no, it started 30 plus years ago with Ann and Bonnie, and has grown to the entire state of Oregon. We have multiple states right now replicating that work. It's being studied by the CDC for efficacy and to replicate it. So it's been highly successful, and we have helped a lot of kids, a lot of families over the years. So yes. On that note, I think that's a good transition for your next question, because it goes right along with it. What's been the most impactful or greatest achievement for CBIRT, or maybe both? What's the most impactful, and then what's the greatest?
Yeah, I think just talking about teams, I think the fact that it is still operational, supported by the Oregon Department of Ed, and I think the only state Department of Education that has had this level of ongoing commitment to this population, which is really, really significant. So I think I'm super proud of that. I think the legislation that you and Dave Kratky and others at CBIRT have advocated for, the credible history, so we no longer have to have medical documentation of TBI. We can use other sources of information to make sure a child qualifies for services. The mandated, I think it's called temporary accommodation plan for students who have a concussion. Most recently, the resource facilitation legislation. That kind of change took years in the case of some of them, like 20. But it's phenomenal that it's happening, and that people in state government are listening and working with us. So it's exciting. And then I think the third area is the work you're doing, Melissa, which is and actually Deanne as well, Deanne Unruh, working in corrections, in education in multiple states. So partnering with folks in state agencies to say, hey, how can we make things better in your state? We know some things, and together we can make some stuff happen. So that, I think those three things are the biggest achievements. And I think that's, it's important to say we are kind of always looking for that level of impact in our work. And it's not just getting publications. It's not just making a product that's cool. It's seeing these things being used and being adopted in large scale ways, and they're starting to be.
Yeah, we really feel like as a whole, I think at CBIRT that research is great and wonderful, and we need it to know things. But if we know things and we learn things from research and we don't share it and we don't get it out into the general public, then what's the point? Right? There's no point if we're not changing practice because of what we know. So totally agree. We have about 5 minutes before we're going to open it up for questions. So I am going to skip through some of our questions that we had for you and go down to, if you could tell the general public one thing about brain injury, what would that be? What do you wish everybody knew? Because they don't know a lot of things. They're starting to, but they don't know a lot of things. So what kernel would you give them?
Well, I think I think I would say that brain injury is really common and it's very serious, and concussion is a brain injury. So I think it's a significant cause of disability in the world, usually preventable. And there's enough things that are hard to prevent, enough public health problems around the world, that I feel like this is an area where we could continue. We've made tons of progress. So in my career, lots and lots of progress. There are far fewer kids having horrible injuries because things like airbags and some of the car safety features that we have now didn't exist back then. So we've made a lot of progress, but we still have lots of kids getting hurt, and lots of adults getting hurt. So I think it's an area that could be a stronger focus.
Mm-hmm. In fact, Ann just mentioned car seat safety. She is currently working on an injury prevention module for our Safe Kids program on car seat installation and car safety. So we'll have one of those coming out soon, that Ann and partnering with David Schwebel are the content developers. If you don't know who David Schwebel is, he's pretty much the lead guru in terms of child safety and injury prevention. And we're pretty happy to partner with him on some of that work, but that'll be some of Ann's work as well as that comes out. So as we have 3 minutes, I want to ask you, as the mother of CBIRT, CBIRT is your baby. What are your dreams for CBIRT? What do you imagine going forward as you slowly step back? I'll say she's slowly stepping back into retirement. What do you hope happens?
It's pretty simple. I hope we keep doing what we're doing. I think, continuing to establish the evidence base, getting those practices that have evidence out there to as broad an audience as possible, and continuing for that to happen. We all know we need to partner with people. So I'm thinking about, I know Jenny Lundeen, Julie Harbaugh-Krupa, Sharon Grant. There were lots of people on here with whom we've partnered. And I think more of that is probably going to be necessary to make the kind of impact that we want to make.
Yeah, I totally agree. The more friends we can make, the more we can partner with folks, the more collaboration we can have, the more impact we can have across the country, and just not Oregon, everywhere, across the world. So yes, we do love Jenny and Julie. Matt just put that in the chat that we love Jenny and Julie. We do very much. When you started CBIRT, did you ever imagine the impact that CBIRT would have? Was that a kernel in your brain, or were you just chipping away at things?
I don't think so. I think, like most of all of you on this call, it's like we're focused on keeping the work going. And in our case, we're really focused on continuing to get access funding for the work, and in finding strong people who could move the work forward. So that was the vision. How do we keep the work going? How do we keep smart people engaged? How do we bring more smart people into the field? So yeah, I didn't really have a vision beyond that. So it's kind of, I think the work that we've done as a group over the years has kind of surprised me, maybe. It surprised me. And I'm super happy.
Well, you led that ship, so congratulations on making all that happen. All right, in our, as we close, I want you to tell everybody what's next for you. happening for you?
So I'm still working on a few projects that I care a lot about. Melissa mentioned the CDC project. I'm continuing to provide mentorship to CBIRT staff. We have some great folks who are newer to our team, and really enjoying that. What I'm not going to do is take up crafts. I hate crafts. I don't like them. I'm not good at them. I will be doing more hiking, more visiting family, more music, more cooking, and sleeping in. Those are my goals. But definitely want to keep. I mean, I keep saying this to Melissa, but it's just too much. We're having too much fun, and it's too exciting a time to completely step back. So I'm staying in the background a bit, but just really enjoying this stage of my career very, very much.
Excellent. All right. And on that note, I'm sure since we have so many people online, there's people who have some questions for you that would love to get an answer. And I don't know, Melanie, do you want to do questions out of the chat, or do you want to do them out of the Q&A? Which way do you want to go?
And I'm going to start with the first question that came through, and it's from Maureen Hall. And she said, she asked, parents who themselves have experienced significant childhood trauma or might be living with that, how do you bring them along in the special ed relationship partnership? Excellent question.
Oh, well, I don't want to pass the buck too much, but the two of you, Melanie and Melissa, could answer that like so much better than me, because how many years has it been since I've been in classrooms? I mean, really good question, but do either one of you want to?
I have a firsthand experience with this, with brain injury, before I even started working with CBIRT or knew much about brain injury. So we had a young man who from kindergarten till about fourth grade was a significant, so I was a principal, so significant behavior problem. So I got to know him pretty well because he would come sit in the table at my office. I had a round table in my office, and I called the kids that got to sit at my table because they were getting in trouble the nights of my round table, because we tried to make it positive and really make it not focused on getting in trouble and the bad behavior. But one of these kids in particular was really, really challenging. And mom was really, really challenging. So after about 4 or 5 years of working with this family, mom comes in and has a meltdown. I pull her into my office, and lo and behold, I find out that they were in a car crash, a very, very significant car crash when he was 4. And both of them sustained brain injuries. And they never told anybody at the school. And so, long story to say, that I really learned in that experience that it's about the relationship. And what's different with TBI than other disabilities is that trauma, right? And I think you can apply that to any kind of trauma. So if you have families that are like that and struggling, you have to make more time. You have to hear the stories, you have to build that relationship, you have to build that trust, and let them know that you're there for them and that their kid is not just a number and they're just not a signature. So that's my short answer. Melanie, you have anything to add?
Well, one of the biggest parts of my job and the liaisons and the team members is helping out those parents navigate the system. That's part of our job. That's one of the biggest things I do all week long. And so that's a great question. We've just got a few minutes, so I've got a few more questions here too. And one from Christy in California. Her son suffered a severe TBI in 2019 and struggling with supports in California. And Christy, we are working with some California folks and all different states working on that. That's one of our goals. We're very passionate about helping states get their systems up and going. It's all about systems and teams.
Mm-hmm.
So Catherine Edmonds, she has a sibling support group. Okay, good. And then Jacqueline Ricker, last question. And again, folks, send those questions in. We're going to get them to Ann. She will answer them at some point. What have you found out about TBI now versus then? And what about military TBI in relation to child TBI? Great question.
Melissa, it's working in the, I mean, too bad we don't have we have some other folks on our team who specifically are working in the military domain. Yeah. Do you want to take that one, Melissa?
I mean, I don't know that we found out too much about TBI then versus now. I think we know how it impacts kids. what's different then versus now is I think we're doing a little bit more about it. I think we're a little more active and engaging people to make things happen. In terms of military TBI in relation to child TBI, I'm assuming you're talking about a parent who has a TBI and then a child ends up with a TBI and they're kind of together. Megan Coons at CBIRT, she actually is very involved in this line of work. I don't know too much about it. I would defer you to Megan in that one, and we can connect you to Megan if you're interested in learning more about that.
Yeah, I hate not answering questions, but at the same time, I think one of my greatest skills is knowing when I don't know the answer.
And not being afraid to say it, right?
Yeah, please send us the questions that you have, and we will do our best to find answers. So I saw another one here from Catherine. Melanie, I don't mean to jump the gun, but asking for resources and connecting around sibling resources. So this is an area that's so important. And I think we do have some resources that we could share, and be happy to do that.
Yep. And then I see the follow-up on trauma as well. I'm talking about both traumas. I think all trauma needs to be treated with that level of respect and dignity, and that anybody who has trauma typically has trust issues, and really needs to know that they're in a safe space. And until they can believe that they're in a safe space, we're not going to get anywhere.
In the last few minutes here, just housekeeping, and then I'll go into another question. In the chat box, we will have a survey link. Please fill that out. It will then direct you to your certificate of completion for this webinar. We will end the webinar in 4 minutes, but great question from our friend Sharon Grandinetti. Did I say that right? And perfect question to end. What would you tell other states to get them to pay attention to kids with TBI? Secondary to, we know that 11 states only have the return to learn laws in place. How would you answer that? Loaded question.
Yeah, and I'll let Melissa chime in here, but my experience goes back when we were working with the state of Arizona in the early 2000s. So I have a historical answer, and I think this is important, and especially in light of the current work on this right to read and this the science of reading work that's being done. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Emily Hanford, who's a journalist, and did a podcast, which we can share, on basically finding out that during COVID, a lot of parents found out their kids were not reading. They thought they were, and they listened to them read on Zoom, and they went, "Whoa, my kid's really struggling. What's going on here?" So this Emily Hanford did a deep dive into what was going on with reading curriculum across the country, and exposed some very interesting things. And I'll leave it at that. But the story that I want to tell goes back to the special ed director of the state of Arizona, and a conversation he and I had about this very thing, Sharon, where it was like, what would it take for your state to get some of these systems in place that Melanie's talking about? What would it take for you to be paying attention to this and get stuff going? And he said, well, and it's not the data. And I was kind of floored. And then I thought, yeah, well, he's in a position of needing to justify budgets to people who aren't necessarily data people. He wanted stories. He wanted information about individual kids that he could share with people, so that to support the work that he wanted to engage in. And I mean, that made sense. And I don't know, Melissa, if you have some other thoughts, because you've been doing this with other states.
Yeah, I will say it's really about, again, I always go back to this. It's about relationship building. It's about getting out there and meeting the people. And eventually, you're going to meet 1,000 people who believe this is important, but don't have access to dollars or funding to do that. And eventually you meet the right person who has connections or is in a position of power. And then we educate that person and all the people around them. And it's all about that with everything we do, right? It's about education. It's about relationships. It's about teaching folks. And I think getting out in front of people, I always tell the CBIRT staff, like, the more presentations we can do, the more conferences we can do, the more present we can be, the more we're going to meet the right people to drive change.
Excellent.
And I think we probably have to stop there.
We do. Thank you so much, Ann, for your wisdom. You will be missed, but we know that you'll be a big part of CBIRT for many years to come.
Thanks so much. Again, really appreciate everybody hopping on. And I'm looking and there's more really great questions. So love to answer these. I have the time to answer questions and to bug Matt and Melanie for resources and Melissa. So we'll answer those via email and send you or however they tell me to do it. And we'll
make sure we get the answers.
Hopefully get you something that'll be helpful. Yeah. Thanks so much. And thanks Melanie and Melissa. And Matt.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody on the call. We're going to close it down now. Matt, go ahead and shut her down.